have to make yourself a sympathetic character. Somebody has to be rooted for.
In the early 1980s, Hollywood was shocked when Charles Bronson, one of its most bankable stars, suddenly disappeared from the spotlight. For years, Bronson had been the face of justice and vengeance, a man whose quiet strength spoke louder than words. But behind the tough guy image was a private man haunted by painful memories, war scars, and the pressures of fame. The public only saw the guns, the grit, and the hard stare. They didn't see the loneliness behind it all. One day, Bronson made a decision that stunned everyone. He walked away from the very world that had made him a legend. His reason wasn't about money, fame, or creative burnout. It was something far more personal and heartbreaking. To understand why he quit, we need to go back to where it all began, deep in the cold, dark coal mines of Pennsylvania, where a poor boy named Charles Bukinski dreamed of a better life. Charles Bronson's story began in 1921, in a small mining town called Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania. He was the 11th of 15 children born to Lithuanian immigrant parents. His father worked long hours in the coal mines, barely earning enough to feed the family. When his father died, Charles was just 10 years old. Life became even harder. The family was so poor that young Charles sometimes wore his sister's dresses to school because they couldn't afford clothes. Food was scarce, and survival meant working in the same dangerous mines that had taken his father's life. He was only 16 when he started mining coal himself, earning just $1 for each ton he hauled. Covered in black dust from head to toe, Bronson often said later that he never forgot what hunger felt like. But the mines also gave him something valuable: unbreakable discipline and strength. When World War II began, he left the mines and joined the U.S. Air Force, desperate to escape poverty and prove himself to the world. In the Air Force, Bronson finally found something he had never known before: respect. Serving as a tail gunner in a bomber squadron, he faced death daily, flying missions over Japan and earning a Purple Heart after being wounded in action. The war changed him forever. It hardened his face, sharpened his will, and deepened his silence. When asked about his military years, Bronson once said, "I never had it so good as when I entered the Army." That statement shocked people, but to him it meant structure, equality, and purpose. For the first time, he wasn't just another poor miner's son. He was part of something bigger. Yet after the war ended, he found himself lost again. He had no education, no money, and no plan. Like many veterans, he carried invisible wounds from battle. He drifted through odd jobs: carpenter, truck driver, even a painter, before discovering a strange new path that would change his life forever: acting. When Bronson entered Hollywood, success did not come easily. His rugged looks and heavy accent made casting agents hesitate. He was told he didn't look American enough for leading roles. Because of his Eastern European background, studios were wary of his birth name, Charles Bukinski, so he changed it to Bronson, inspired by a Los Angeles street sign. Even then, he was often typecast as a soldier, a thug, or a background tough guy. For years, he played small parts, standing in the shadows while others took the glory. But his silence worked in his favor. There was something magnetic about him, a kind of quiet danger. Directors noticed. He didn't have to shout or pose. He could say more with a stare than most actors could with a page of dialogue. That unique presence eventually caught the attention of filmmakers in Europe, where audiences were more open to unconventional heroes. By the early 1960s, Hollywood still hadn't fully embraced Bronson, but European directors saw something special in him. When he starred in The Magnificent Seven, 1960, audiences finally took notice. Then came The Great Escape in 1963, where his portrayal of a claustrophobic tunneler who fought through fear made him unforgettable. Europeans loved his raw masculinity and stoic charisma. In France, Italy, and Britain, he became a major star long before America truly accepted him. In 1968, director Sergio Leone cast him in Once Upon a Time in the West, a role that transformed his career. With almost no dialogue, Bronson's mysterious harmonica man became a symbol of revenge, loneliness, and quiet pain. The movie cemented his image as the strong, silent avenger. When he returned to the United States, Hollywood could no longer ignore him. Bronson was finally a star, but it came with a price. In the 1970s, Charles Bronson became one of the most bankable stars in the world. Films like The Mechanic, Hard Times, and Mr. Majestic showed his range, from hitman to working-class hero. But it was Death Wish, 1974, that turned him into a cultural phenomenon. Playing Paul Kersey, an architect who turns vigilante after his wife is murdered, Bronson became the face of a darker, more violent America. The movie was both praised and criticized for its brutal honesty. Audiences loved the idea of a man taking justice into his own hands, but critics accused it of glorifying violence. Bronson never saw it that way. To him, the film was about grief, trauma, and helplessness, the same emotions he had lived through his whole life. He once said, "The audience sees me as one of them. I'm not an actor playing a part. I'm a man doing what they wish they could do." But that connection came at a cost. The more people saw him as a hero, the lonelier he became. Despite his fame, Bronson remained deeply private. He avoided Hollywood parties, rarely gave interviews, and spent most of his time at home with his wife, Jill Ireland. She was the light of his life, a British actress with warmth and humor that balanced his quiet intensity. They starred together in several films, creating one of Hollywood's most admired partnerships. But behind the cameras, their love story was marked by tragedy. In 1984, Jill was diagnosed with breast cancer. Bronson, who had faced death countless times on screen, suddenly found himself powerless against the one enemy he couldn't fight. He stood by her through every surgery and treatment, refusing new film offers to stay by her side. He told friends that nothing mattered more than her recovery. For a man who had grown up in silence, his actions spoke volumes. When Jill died in 1990, Charles Bronson was never the same again. Jill Ireland's death broke Bronson's spirit. The man who had once embodied strength and control now struggled with unbearable grief. For years, she had been his emotional anchor, the only person who truly understood the pain he carried inside. After she passed, Bronson began withdrawing from Hollywood completely. He rejected major film offers, avoided public appearances, and spent more time painting, one of the few activities that brought him peace. People around him noticed a change. He wasn't angry or bitter, just quiet. His friends said that after losing Jill, he had nothing left to prove. For someone who had built a life around discipline and survival, this loss felt like a final defeat. The man who once stood tall against every enemy, poverty, war, rejection, had finally faced a wound too deep to heal. That was the moment Charles Bronson truly walked away from Hollywood. Off-screen, Bronson was nothing like the violent men he played. He was gentle, polite, and even shy. His children recalled that he rarely raised his voice and preferred spending evenings gardening or sketching. He wrote letters to his late wife for years after her death, as if she were still with him. Many who met him were surprised to find that he spoke softly and smiled easily. He once said, "I'm not a tough guy. I just play them." Those who knew him best said he carried a deep sadness, a reflection of a life spent hiding emotion behind a hard face. Even as his health declined in the late 1990s, he continued to avoid interviews. He didn't want sympathy or fame, just peace. In his later years, Bronson suffered from Alzheimer's disease, which slowly erased his memories. The man who had lived through war, loss, and Hollywood's chaos faded quietly, surrounded by family. He passed away in 2003 at age 81, leaving behind a legacy few could match. Charles Bronson's story is one of pain, strength, and quiet resilience. He wasn't a typical Hollywood star. He didn't chase fame or glamour. He represented something more timeless, the working man's hero. His characters were ordinary people pushed to the edge, just like he once was. Bronson never forgot where he came from. He carried his past, the coal mines, the war, the hunger, into every performance. That's what made him believable. Audiences could feel his truth. Even though he left Hollywood behind, his image remains iconic. The man who spoke through silence, who fought through pain, and who loved deeply but quietly. In a world filled with noise and ego, Charles Bronson stood apart, a man who never pretended to be anything other than himself. When he walked away from Hollywood, he wasn't quitting. He was simply choosing peace over performance. And maybe, after all the battles he fought, he had finally earned it. Charles Bronson never cared about fame, money, or luxury. Even at the height of his stardom, when studios were paying him millions, he lived simply. He preferred quiet evenings at home instead of parties, and he often said that fame made him uncomfortable. "I'm not a movie star," he told an interviewer once. "I'm just a working man who acts." That humility was rare in an industry built on ego and image. While other actors hired publicists and stylists, Bronson showed up to sets in worn-out jeans and boots. He didn't care about appearances, he cared about doing his job. Directors loved his professionalism. He arrived early, knew every line, and never complained. Crew members said he was respectful to everyone, from camera operators to extras. But the same seriousness that made him dependable also made him distant. He didn't make small talk or fake smiles. People often misunderstood his silence, thinking he was cold or arrogant. In truth, he was shy, a man who had spent his childhood in poverty and never learned how to play the Hollywood game. Throughout his career, Bronson was offered many roles that could have made him even more famous, but he often turned them down. He refused to play Dirty Harry, a role that later made Clint Eastwood a legend, saying he didn't like how it glorified violence without showing consequences. He also turned down parts that he felt didn't fit his values or character. "If I can't believe it, I can't play it," he once said. He wasn't interested in playing glamorous heroes or charming lovers. He liked characters who had depth, men who were broken, haunted, and real. That's why audiences trusted him. They could see the truth in his eyes. Even though Hollywood often pushed him toward commercial action films, Bronson tried to bring emotion into every performance. In The Mechanic, for example, he played a hitman training a younger assassin, but beneath the violence, he showed loneliness and guilt. That balance of strength and sadness became his signature. To Bronson, acting wasn't about fame, it was about honesty. Away from the cameras, Bronson was a devoted father and husband. He had 3 children, Zuleika, Katrina, and Suzanne, and he adored them deeply. His daughter Zuleika, born from his marriage to Jill Ireland, was his pride and joy. Friends said he was surprisingly gentle at home, spending time cooking breakfast or helping with homework. He also enjoyed simple hobbies like woodworking, painting, and gardening. His art was colorful and emotional, often inspired by the landscapes of California and Vermont, where he owned homes. Painting gave him peace, a way to express the feelings he couldn't put into words. His wife Jill often said that painting was the only time she saw him truly relax. Bronson wasn't a man who spoke about love openly, but he showed it through his actions. When Jill was sick, he became her caretaker, refusing to leave her side. He learned how to give medical injections and helped her through chemotherapy. After her passing, he filled their home with her photos and rarely spoke of her in public again. It was too painful. One of Bronson's most interesting relationships in Hollywood was with fellow actor Steve McQueen. The two men met while filming The Magnificent Seven and quickly developed a mutual respect. Both came from tough backgrounds and shared a dislike for Hollywood's artificial glamour. However, their friendship was also marked by competition. McQueen was charming and outgoing, while Bronson was quiet and reserved. McQueen once said, "I like Charlie, but you can't get close to him." Their rivalry grew when McQueen's wife, Jill Ireland, later fell in love with Bronson. Surprisingly, there was no public feud. McQueen and Bronson remained civil, and after McQueen's death, Bronson married Jill. It was one of those rare Hollywood stories where respect triumphed over ego. Still, Bronson never spoke much about their personal connection. He carried his emotions privately, as he always had. Even when others tried to stir gossip, he simply said, "I respected the man." That short sentence said everything. After the success of Death Wish in 1974, studios begged Bronson to continue the franchise. He initially refused, fearing it would cheapen the story. But the demand was too high. He eventually agreed to do sequels, though he often complained about the growing violence in each one. By the 1980s, Death Wish had become a cultural phenomenon, turning Bronson into an icon of urban justice. Yet the series also typecast him. Many fans forgot his earlier, more nuanced performances.